Alright guys, what's up everybody? Welcome to Fed by Fire. I'm Christian Whitlow. So recently Tommy G had just put out a video about data centers and what they mean for the people living around them, and it gave me a little insight about looking into my own area and seeing if there's a data center being built near me. And what would you know? A proposed Google data center in Botetourt County would use between 2 and 8 million gallons of drinking water every single day, pulled from Carvins Cove Reservoir, the primary drinking water source for Botetourt County and much of the Roanoke Valley. And that single fact is where this entire conversation really begins, because on paper, this is presented as progress, as economic development, as jobs, as tax base expansion, as modernization. But when you actually live here, when you raise a family here, when your water comes from the same system that is being tied to industrial scale infrastructure, the question stops being abstract, and becomes very, very direct. What exactly are we agreeing to? Who actually benefits? And what does this mean long term for the place that we already call home? Because this is not about one company or one project. This is part of a broader national shift where massive data centers are being built across the country, and communities are told they are clean industry, invisible infrastructure, and the cloud is something weightless, modern, but physically a data center is a warehouse-scale industrial facility filled with tens of thousands of servers running continuously, generating constant heat that requires non-stop cooling systems that are powered by massive electricity demands and often significant water use. And when you scale that kind of infrastructure out to millions of gallons per day of water, the impact becomes tangible. When it is described in technical terms, that makes it sound controlled or manageable, because officials may say the reservoir can be handled, projected, demand under current conditions, but capacity today is not the same as stability tomorrow, especially in a region where drought cycles, population growth, and climate variability all layering on top of long-term industrial expansion. And once a water system begins allocating large volumes to industrial users, the entire infrastructure of that system shifts around those, commitments, including long-term infrastructure planning, capital investment properties, and future restrictions that most residents do not see until they are already being implemented. And water is only the first layer of this, because the second layer is energy demand, because data centers are among the most energy-intensive facilities in the modern economy, running without interruption to power cloud computing, AI systems, and global data storage, streaming services, as well as financial transactions and communication networks. So these are things we all use every day, and there's a constant demand and, continuous pressure on the electrical grid, requiring, utilities to plan new substations, expand transmission capacity, and upgrade infrastructure in, years in advance of the load actually arriving. And while these developments are often framed at the county level as an economic opportunity, quote unquote, increased tax revenue, construction jobs, infrastructure investment, the broader reality is that grid expansion is regional and interconnected, meaning the cost of upgrading the system can be spread across entire service areas, far beyond the immediate footprint of the facility itself. And when there is the pollution aspect that rarely gets emphasized in public presentations, because while data centers are marketed as clean technology, they typically rely on diesel backup generators, for redundancy and emergency power. And those generators are not symbolic equipment. They are industrial engines capable of powering entire campuses during outages. When they are tested or activated, they produce nitrogen oxides, particulates, emissions, carbon outputs, and a lot of significant noise, creating a localized pollution source that does not resemble transitional smokestack industry, but still affects air quality and the environment. It's very real, you guys, in ways that we could never imagine. Before any of that comes operational, the land itself has to be transformed through large-scale grading, clearing, stormwater redesign, road expansion, utility corridor installation, and permanent conversion of terrain into industrial infrastructure. And once that conversion happens, it becomes extremely difficult to reverse because the site is tied to electrical systems, cooling systems, and transportation access and long-term corporate use. And all of this leads into a larger issue. It's not just environmental, it's structural, which is how these decisions are made. And when they are communicated, because most large-scale developments move through planning and approval stages where technical agreements, utility contracts, and infrastructure contaminants are established long before the average resident like me or you is fully aware of the scale of what's going on or of what is being proposed. And by the time the public is aware and catches up the core structure of the project, it is already locked in and often too late. Through binding arrangements that are difficult to unwind, which create a feeling for many people that they are reacting to decisions rather than shaping them. And in Botetourt County, that feeling becomes especially important because this is not an abstract policy debate. It is about a specific community, a specific reservoir, and a specific power grid, and a specific place where people are raising families just like me, trying to build lives. And when officials say the system can handle projected demand, that may be true within current models, but these models are based on assumptions about growth, and that kind of thing can change very quickly. As artificial intelligence and cloud computing expand faster than traditional infrastructure planning cycles, which, the real question is not only whether the project fits within current capacity, but how that capacity is expected to evolve over time, and who carries the cost when it does. Because at the county level, these projects are often framed as, a beautiful things, promises of jobs and tax revenue. But from what I've seen, a lot of the truth is there's not a lot of jobs once it's built, And those benefits are real and short term, and they exist alongside, structural questions, resource allocation, environmental impact, and community control. And when you talk to people who live here, the conversation becomes much more grounded and direct. And people say they did not move to Botetourt to live next to an industrial scale infrastructure. And people say they are hearing about the scale of these projects only after major decisions are already in motion. And people say they are concerned about, the region, what it will look like in 10 or 20 years. And forget about people. I am, And we got to wonder what it's look like once it's converted into a data center campus. If more pressure is placed on water and energy systems that were designed for a very different kind of demand, and, parents in particular talk about the future in practical terms, what, their kids will grow up around, whether the character of the area will change gradually without people fully noticing until it's already different. And is there consistent, sentiment that this is not framed as opposition to technology or development itself, but as a question of fairness and transparency about whether the people who live here have meaningful input before the most important commitments are made. Because once millions of gallons of water are allocated daily, once transmission infrastructure is built, once land is permanently converted and agreements are signed, that system becomes extremely difficult to change. And, in that sense, these facilities run themselves only after they are built, in the sense that operations have become automated and remote, with cooling systems adjusting through sensors, power loads being balanced by software, and backup generators held in constant readiness for network and traffic managed across the globe. Sorry, guys. But this infrastructure is relatively small on site when it comes to using a workforce for the handling, the maintenance, and emergencies, while most control is distributed across remote engineering teams, people working from home, and automated systems that operate far outside the community where the physical infrastructure sits, meaning that once the project is operational, the day-to-day decisions are no longer local decisions. They are part of a global network of infrastructure management that responds to demands and patterns that originate far beyond the county itself. And that is the final reality of all this, because once it's built, once a data center is there, it's not just a building. It becomes a permanent industrial system embedded into a region, continuously consuming water, energy, and land resources according to the global digital demand. And the question for Botetourt County is not simply whether the development brings growth, but what kind of growth it represents, who it serves, what trade-offs are being accepted in exchange for it. Because once you strip away the language of innovation and progress, what remains is a physical reality that every community eventually has to face, which is that digital infrastructure still exists in the real world, and the real world always carries the cost somewhere. But tell me what you guys think in the comments. Today is my 9-year-old's birthday. I didn't want to do the video in the studio because my wife's sleeping. But yeah, AI is a beautiful tool. I made the thumbnail for this video with AI. But, call me a hypocrite, call me what you want. But nobody wants a data center popping up in their town. Tell me what y'all think in the comments. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.